I don't know what you think you're doing here, but this park isn't for people like you. Did you hear me? Pack your things and go back to wherever you came from." "I'm just sitting here, ma'am," Darius Coleman replied. "I'm not bothering anyone. You know what? I'm calling the police." Claire Whitmore stepped closer, already holding her phone. As she dialed, a satisfied smile spread across her face. She had done this before, and it had always ended exactly the way she expected. Darius stared straight ahead. He didn't argue. Claire had no idea that the officers she was calling were about to sit down beside him, and then turn their attention directly toward her. Before continuing, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The morning was almost painfully beautiful. A clear blue sky stretched overhead. Warm sunlight spilled across the grass, the kind of late summer weather that could make you forget, if only for a moment, that the world was capable of ugliness. Millbrook Park was quiet. A few joggers moved along the path. A young mother pushed a stroller. Children could be heard playing somewhere in the distance. Birds shifted through the oak branches overhead. Darius Coleman sat alone on a wooden bench near the pavilion, drawing. His sketchbook rested open across his knees, its pages softened by years of use. His pencil moved in careful, deliberate strokes as he traced the pavilion roof across the path, the curve of the overhang, the angle of the supporting beams, the small structural details most people passed every day without ever noticing. One earbud rested in his ear. The music was low. The world felt comfortably distant. He wore a blue hoodie that was 2 sizes too large. His mother had bought it that way intentionally. "You'll grow into it," she had told him while folding it into his drawer like a promise. Darius was 18 years old. Inside the back of his sketchbook was a letter offering him a full scholarship. He hadn't shown it to anyone. He hadn't even spoken the words aloud. He had carried the letter around for several days, as though it were something fragile, afraid that bringing it fully into the world might somehow make it disappear. For now, sitting on that bench beneath the warm sun, Darius was simply drawing, breathing, existing. And somehow, that was enough to become a problem. I didn't notice the woman at first. I was concentrating on the pavilion roof, trying to get the curve exactly right. Then, something made him look up. That strange instinct people have when they can feel someone staring before they actually see them. A woman had stopped on the path roughly 30 feet away. Her blonde hair was pulled tightly back. She wore a red tank top and held the leashes of 2 golden retrievers. Both dogs were sitting patiently beside her. She was staring at Darius with the expression of someone who had already decided he didn't belong. Darius lowered his eyes to his sketchbook again. The woman didn't move. He could still feel her stare pressing between his shoulder blades. Then she walked toward him. "Excuse me." Her voice was sharp and bright, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "What exactly are you doing on this bench?" Darius slowly removed his earbud. Carefully, he looked up at her with the neutral expression his mother had spent years teaching him to perfect. "Drawing," he said. Claire gave a short laugh. There was no humor in it. "Drawing?" She repeated the word as though a child had told her something ridiculous. Her eyes traveled over his hoodie, backpack, and face, taking inventory. "Right. And do you actually live anywhere around here? Or did you just wander in?" "It's a public park," Darius said. Claire tilted her head. Her lips tightened as though he had said something amusing. "I know what it is, sweetheart. I've lived here for 11 years. That wasn't my question." "No, ma'am, I don't live around here." The corner of her mouth lifted. It wasn't a smile. It was something colder. "No, I didn't think so." She looked him up and down again, slowly and deliberately, making certain he felt every second of her judgment. Then I think you'd probably be more comfortable somewhere else, don't you? There are plenty of other parks. Darius said nothing. He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he lowered his eyes back to the sketchbook. His pencil touched the page again. His hand remained steady. "I'm sure of that. I'm talking to you." Claire's voice became quieter. Somehow, that made it worse. "Don't do that. Don't sit there ignoring me like I'm the problem." Darius didn't look up. Claire made a sharp sound of disgust, as though she had stepped in something unpleasant. Then she reached for her phone. She dialed while keeping her eyes fixed on him. Darius heard every word. "Yes, I need to report someone. I'm at Millbrook Park, near the pavilion. There's a young man here. He's been sitting here loitering and acting very aggressive." She paused. "Dark hoodie, backpack. He's making me feel extremely unsafe. I have my dogs with me. I'm a woman alone, and I have no idea what he has inside that bag." Her voice changed. It became softer and more deliberate, rehearsed. "He's black, a teenager, maybe 18. He told me he doesn't live in this area, so I have no idea why he's here." Darius closed his sketchbook. He placed his pencil on top. Then he put both hands flat on his knees, fingers open and clearly visible. His mother's voice immediately returned to his mind. She had repeated those instructions to him countless times since childhood. "Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't reach for anything. Don't argue. Stay calm, Darius. Stay calm, no matter what happens." He stared straight ahead at the pavilion he had been drawing. At the roof line, he had almost gotten exactly right. He inhaled slowly through his nose and exhaled through his mouth, as though none of this were happening, as though his heart weren't pounding against his ribs, as though he weren't furious, as though he weren't afraid. 3 benches away, an elderly man wearing a gray jacket slowly folded his newspaper and began watching. Claire Whitmore ended the call. Then she turned back toward Darius. She clearly wasn't finished. Her phone was no longer against her ear. Now she held it in front of her. The camera faced him. She was recording. Her dogs had settled at her feet, panting lazily and completely unconcerned. Their owner was another matter. Claire planted herself about 12 feet away and waited. Darius didn't move. He didn't look at her. His hands stayed flat against his knees. His eyes remained fixed on the pavilion, as though it were the most fascinating thing in the world. As though she weren't there. As though the camera weren't pointed at him. As though none of this were happening. On a beautiful morning, when all he had wanted to do was draw. "You know," Claire said loudly enough for nearby people to hear, "most innocent people don't just sit there like statues. They talk. They explain themselves." Darius remained silent. "Just something I've noticed." She shifted her weight and tilted her head. Guilty conscience, maybe. A jogger slowed behind her. A young woman with a ponytail and earbuds noticed the scene. She stopped. Her eyes moved between Claire and Darius. Instead of leaving, she moved toward the edge of the path and pretended to stretch her calf. "Good," Darius thought. "Let someone see this. I may need a witness." "I'm going to need you to open that bag," Claire said. Darius finally looked up, slowly, steadily. No. Her eyebrows shot upward, as though the word had physically struck her. "Excuse me? You're not a police officer," Darius said. "I don't have to show you anything." Something moved across Claire's face. Surprise. Then irritation. Then bright, hard amusement, as though she had suddenly decided to enjoy the confrontation. "Oh, okay, I see." She nodded slowly. "So, you've got rights. That's what you're going to do now? Sit there and lecture me about your rights?" She laughed sharply. "That's rich, honey. That is really something." The jogger remained nearby, farther along the path. An older man walking a beagle had stopped as well. The dog sniffed the grass while its owner watched quietly. "You're making this much worse for yourself," Claire said. Her voice returned to that low, instructional tone, as though she were helping him. "The police are coming. They're on their way right now. And when they get here and see you sitting there refusing to cooperate, refusing to even have a simple conversation, how do you think that looks?" She leaned slightly forward. "How do you think this ends for you?" Darius held her gaze. "I haven't done anything wrong." "That," Claire pointed directly at him. "That is exactly what somebody who did something wrong would say." She turned slightly, now fully aware of the small audience forming around them. Her posture changed. She straightened, raised her chin. Now she wasn't simply confronting Darius. She was performing. "I have every right to report suspicious activity in my neighborhood. This is my park. I walk here every morning, and I have never, ever seen you here before." "That's because you don't know me," Darius replied. "And I don't want to," she shot back. The words came fast and flat. Then Claire seemed to realize how they sounded. She glanced toward the people watching and deliberately softened her face. "Look, I'm not trying to create trouble. I'm just trying to keep this neighborhood safe. That's all." Darius almost laughed. The sound nearly escaped before he stopped it. Nothing was funny, but there was something almost unbelievable about how completely she believed herself. He could see it in her eyes. Claire genuinely believed she was the reasonable person in this situation. Darius turned back toward the pavilion. Both hands returned flat to his knees. He breathed. 3 benches away, the elderly man stood. His name was Samuel Booker, though almost everyone called him Deacon Booker. He tucked his folded newspaper beneath one arm and began walking toward the scene. Unhurried, like a man with all the time in the world, he stopped within hearing distance and clasped his hands behind his back. Then he watched. From the park entrance came the sound of tires rolling over asphalt. 2 patrol cars slowly approached. Darius noticed them before Claire did. White and blue vehicles. No emergency lights. Moving calmly. His entire body tightened, but his hands remained exactly where they were. "Calm," he reminded himself. "Whatever happens next, stay calm." The patrol cars stopped. Officer Calvin Ross stepped out of the first vehicle. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark uniform, his silver badge catching the sunlight. He was 44 years old, and had the expression of a man who had witnessed enough in life to remain composed through almost anything. He assessed the entire scene in seconds. Claire Whitmore holding her phone. Darius on the bench, with his hands clearly visible. A small collection of witnesses along the path. An elderly man observing from the side. Officer Tessa Morgan stepped out of the second patrol car. She was younger, with calm, observant eyes. She read the situation almost as quickly. Claire immediately rushed forward. "Officers, thank goodness. He's right there. He's been sitting there refusing to cooperate, refusing to identify himself, refusing to—" Officer Ross walked straight past her, not around her, past her, as though she hadn't spoken. His attention remained on Darius. Claire turned, stunned, watching him continue toward the bench. Ross reached Darius. Then he did something Darius had never expected. Officer Ross sat down, right beside him. He left a respectful amount of space between them and leaned forward, resting his elbows against his knees, like 2 people preparing to have an ordinary conversation. Darius stared at him. He couldn't help it. Of every possibility he had prepared himself for, every warning his mother had quietly given him over the years, every scenario that had rushed through his mind when he first saw the patrol cars, this was not one of them. "You doing okay, son?" Ross asked. His voice was low. Darius blinked. "Yes, sir." "You been sitting here long?" "About an hour." Ross nodded. "What are you working on?" Darius hesitated. Then he picked up his sketchbook. Without speaking, he opened it toward the officer. Ross looked at the drawings. Really looked. He didn't glance dismissively. He studied the lines, the pavilion, the structural details. His expression changed. These are good. He looked toward Darius. You do this often. Every weekend I can. Officer Morgan had quietly moved closer. She leaned slightly toward the sketchbook. Genuine surprise crossed her face. These are really good, she said. I mean, actually impressive. Excuse me. Claire's voice came sharply from behind them. I called you because this person was loitering and refusing to. Ross stood. He slowly turned toward her. Something about the complete absence of urgency in his movement in the middle of her sentence. Ma'am, he said evenly, this young man is sitting on a public bench in a public park. He paused. He has committed no crime. He has violated no ordinance. Another pause. There is nothing for us to do here except make sure he's all right. Ross briefly glanced back at Darius. Claire's face turned red from her neck upward. I pay taxes in this neighborhood. I've lived here for 11 years, and I have never once— Your name, ma'am? Ross asked. He had taken out a small notebook. His pen was ready. I'll need it for my report. Claire stopped. For your report? Yes, ma'am, for the record. Ross waited patiently. Something passed through Claire's expression that she couldn't quite hide. Her phone slowly lowered. She gave him her name stiffly, as though even saying it cost her something. Officer Morgan had turned back to Darius. She spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. You planning to study this? Architecture or something? Darius looked at her. Then, almost without thinking, he opened the back of his sketchbook and removed the folded scholarship letter. He handed it to her. Morgan, read it. Her eyebrows rose. She looked at him. Full ride? Yes, ma'am. She returned the letter, smiling genuinely. You better come back someday and build something in this city. Officer Ross walked back toward Darius. He held out his hand. Darius stood and shook it. Firm, solid. Congratulations, son, Ross said quietly. I mean that. Behind them, Claire was already walking quickly toward the park exit while speaking on her phone. Then, the elderly man with the folded newspaper approached from across the grass. He moved like someone who had somewhere to be, but no reason to hurry. I was in his early 70s, with closely cropped white hair and steady dark eyes behind wire-framed glasses. His gray jacket was neatly pressed. His shoes were clean. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had already survived the worst the world could offer, and had come through it with his spine still straight. He stopped in front of Darius and the officers. Samuel Booker, he said. Then he looked at Ross. Most people call me Deacon. Something changed in Ross's expression. Recognition. I know that name. I imagine you do. Deacon Booker turned toward Darius. He studied the young man carefully. The steady jaw, the sketchbook pressed against his side, the controlled posture. There was something measured in the old man's expression, like a doctor who already knew the diagnosis and was deciding how to deliver it. He reached into his jacket. From an inside pocket, he removed a folded document. White paper. Official city letterhead. He held it toward Darius. Not toward Ross. Not toward Morgan. Toward Darius. Darius took it. Slowly, he unfolded it. The paper was crisp and recently printed. His eyes moved across the heading. City of Claremont. Office of Municipal Development. Redevelopment Condemnation Order. Then he saw the address. East Side Corridor, Claremont, Ohio. His address. His home. Darius read the document again. Then, a third time. More slowly. Because the first two times, his mind had tried to reject what he was seeing. The language was bureaucratic and dense. But underneath the legal language was something brutally simple. The city had initiated eminent domain proceedings against a 6-block section of the East Side corridor. Every building in that stretch was targeted. Residents would be required to leave. A proposed buyout amount appeared near the bottom. Darius stared at the number. It wouldn't cover the first and last month's rent on a 1-bedroom apartment anywhere in Claremont. Not even close. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was quieter than he intended. "City Bulletin," Deacon said. "Posted online a few days ago. I recognized the block. Recognized your building." He paused. "I've been coming to this park every weekend for years. Son, I know most of the families on that corridor by name." Officer Ross moved closer and read over Darius's shoulder. The calm professionalism he had carried since leaving his patrol car tightened slightly around the edges. Morgan watched Deacon. "Who filed it?" Ross asked. Deacon looked at him steadily. "The development company behind the project, his Whitmore Property Partners." The name landed hard. Ross became completely still. Morgan turned toward the park exit, toward the direction Claire Whitmore had disappeared only moments earlier. Darius felt the pieces connecting inside his chest before his mind fully assembled them. Her husband? Deacon nodded. Victor Whitmore, City Councilman, District 4. He's held the seat for 9 years, and he sits on the Municipal Development Subcommittee. He said it without drama. The facts were terrible enough on their own. Darius looked down again. His scholarship letter was still tucked inside the same sketchbook. The letter he hadn't told anyone about. The future he had barely allowed himself to believe in. Then he thought about his mother. Denise Coleman was at work. Another double shift at the hospital laundry. She would come through their front door later, smelling faintly of industrial detergent, remove her shoes beside the entrance, and ask what he wanted for dinner. She had no idea this document existed, no idea that the city intended to take their home. Darius carefully folded the condemnation notice along its original creases. Then he slid it into the sketchbook beside his scholarship letter. His future and the threat against everything beneath it were now pressed together between the same worn covers. He stood silently, holding the book. Nobody spoke. The park was still beautiful. The sun was still warm. Somewhere across the grass, a child laughed. None of it felt real. The east side looked exactly as it always had. That was the strangest part. Darius walked home through streets he had known his entire life. Everything remained where it belonged. Frank Wallace's rusted pickup sat in the same place it had occupied for years. The sidewalk outside the laundromat still had the same missing chunk he had stepped around since childhood. Harold and Mabel Green's diner still stood beneath its hand-painted sign. Green's Kitchen, home cooking since 1989. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the screen door. Gloria Benton's porch overflowed with late summer color. Marigolds in clay pots lined the steps, orange and yellow flowers spilling over one another. Gloria herself wasn't outside, but evidence of her was everywhere. The swept concrete, tomato plants carefully tied along the railing, a wind chime turning lazily over the door. She had lived there for 41 years. Darius continued walking. When he reached the apartment, he went inside and sat at the kitchen table without even removing his backpack. The room was quiet. Only the refrigerator hummed. A television could be heard from the apartment above. Darius placed his sketchbook on the table. Then he waited. When Denise Coleman finally came home, she was still wearing her work uniform, a pale blue shirt bearing the hospital laundry logo, dark pants, and shoes she removed before she had completely closed the door. She was 47 years old. She moved like someone who had been standing since before sunrise, because she had. She dropped her bag onto a chair, rolled her neck once. Then she noticed her son sitting at the kitchen table with his backpack still on. She stopped. Mothers know things, often before anyone tells them. Darius. Her voice became careful. What happened? He removed his backpack, opened his sketchbook, then placed 2 pieces of paper side by side on the kitchen table, the scholarship letter and the condemnation order. He told her everything. The park, the drawing, Claire Whitmore, the police call, Officer Ross sitting beside him on the bench, Officer Morgan reading his scholarship letter, and finally, Deacon Booker approaching through the grass, carrying that folded city document in his jacket, like a man who had been carefully holding bad news. Denise sat down. She picked up the condemnation notice first. She read important things the same way she did everything else, slowly, completely, without showing what she felt until she understood every word. Her eyes traveled line by line to the buyout figure. She stared at the number. Then she placed the document down and picked up the scholarship letter. She read that slowly too, all the way through. Darius watched her face. He couldn't read it. Finally, Denise placed both papers precisely beside one another. She aligned their edges, folded her hands over them, then looked at her son. "We are not going anywhere." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam a hand against the table. Her eyes didn't fill with tears. She said it as though it had never actually been a question. Flat, certain, absolute, like gravity. "We are not going anywhere." Darius nodded once. He believed her completely. "Call Mr. Booker first thing," Denise said. Then she pushed away from the table, walked toward the stove, and began heating the rice and chicken left from the night before. The burner clicked. Blue flame appeared, and Denise Coleman cooked dinner, as though the ground beneath their lives weren't being sold away. They ate at the same table. The 2 documents remained between the salt shaker and the napkin holder. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy. It meant something else. "We're still here. We're still standing, and we're going to figure this out." Long after his mother went to bed, Darius remained at the table with his sketchbook open. He couldn't sleep, so he drew the east side from memory. Gloria's porch, the diner sign, rows of narrow houses with their tiny front yards, the broken sidewalk outside the laundromat. He drew everything exactly as it existed. He had no idea that those drawings might eventually be what saved it. Soon, Darius and Denise sat across from Deacon Booker in his cramped office. The condemnation notice lay flat on his desk. Deacon looked at both of them. Then he said, "Then we fight it." His office was small and made no attempt to pretend otherwise. 2 overflowing metal filing cabinets pressed against one wall. Some drawers no longer closed completely. Folders, legal pads, and half-empty coffee cups covered his desk. A single window faced a narrow alley. Law books filled shelves that bowed beneath their weight. The room smelled of old paper and black coffee. It felt like exactly the kind of place where serious work happened quietly, without applause. Deacon settled into his chair and interlocked his fingers. "Eminent domain is legal," he said. "I didn't soften the truth. The city has the authority to acquire private property for public use. That part is real. That part is the law." He looked first at Darius, then Denise. "But the process has rules, strict rules. And when those rules aren't followed, that's where we fight." He had already identified what he called procedural vulnerabilities, irregularities in the filing timeline, questions about the way public notice had been issued. Deacon believed he had enough to request an emergency injunction, a court order temporarily stopping everything, while a judge reviewed whether the city had followed proper procedures. He would file it immediately, and he would do it pro bono, no fee, no charge, nothing owed. "You've done enough already," Denise said. "I haven't done anything yet," Deacon replied simply. "Let's get to work." Over the following days, Darius and Deacon went door to door. Every building across the 6-block corridor, every resident willing to answer. They carried yellow legal pads and wrote down everything: names, dates, documents, stories. And street by street, door by door, they discovered something disturbing. The East Side wasn't simply a poor neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that had been deliberately kept poor. The building violations came first. Darius had noticed them over the years without understanding the larger pattern. Notices taped to doors, red stickers on windows, inspectors arriving unexpectedly. What he hadn't known was that the enforcement was different depending on where people lived. On the East Side, code violations were written quickly and enforced aggressively. A loose stair railing, an aging water heater, cracked exterior paint. Minor problems became official citations with short deadlines and financial penalties. But the same violations in Claremont Heights, only a few miles away, remained unresolved for years without consequences. Deacon had pulled the comparison data. One evening, he showed Darius the numbers. 2 columns side by side. The disparity wasn't subtle. Then they examined property assessments. For more than a decade, East Side properties had been assigned artificially low values on the surface that kept property taxes low, but it also ensured residents never accumulated meaningful equity. You couldn't borrow against a home the city insisted was worth almost nothing. You couldn't sell it for enough money to begin again somewhere else. People were trapped exactly where they were, with exactly what they had. Then came the businesses. Harold Green met them inside the diner before the breakfast crowd arrived. From beneath the counter, he removed a manila folder as though he had been waiting years for someone to finally ask the right question. Inside were 7 letters. Every one came from the city business permit office. Every one denied a renewal request. The reasons changed slightly each time. The exhaust ventilation, the grease trap, the outdoor seating permit. Each denial forced Harold to begin again. Another application, another fee, another waiting period, another expense he could barely afford. I just kept reapplying, Harold said, pushing the folder across the counter. I was 68, with thick hands, tired eyes, and a voice like warm gravel. Because what else are you supposed to do? This is our place. Mabel and I built it from nothing. Mabel emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee pot. She was the same age as her husband, small, silver-haired, quietly dignified, in a way that filled the room without demanding attention. She refilled their cups without being asked. Then she returned to the kitchen. Darius saw her jaw tighten as she walked away. 30 years. They had fed that neighborhood for 30 years. That evening, Darius sat across from Deacon inside his office. Everything was spread between them. Violation records, property assessment comparisons, Harold's denial letters, statements from multiple residents. The entire ugly picture lay across the desk. This was planned, Darius said. It wasn't a question. Deacon looked at the documents, then at him. At least 5 years, he said. Not long afterward, Deacon called Darius and told him to come to the office. I found something. When Darius arrived, Deacon was behind his desk with his reading glasses on. A document lay open in front of him. Several sections had been circled in red. Deacon held up one finger. Give me a second. Darius sat and waited. Finally, the old man removed his glasses. He leaned back. His expression held equal parts anger and grim satisfaction. It was the look of a man who had found exactly what he had hoped he wouldn't find. The public notices, Deacon said, for the condemnation hearings. What about them? They were posted in the city's municipal bulletin. He tapped the page. Online only. Darius listened. The city website requires account registration just to access the notification page. There were no paper notices, nothing posted at community boards, nothing at the library, no flyers. He paused. Do you know how many residents along those 6 blocks are over 60? Darius shook his head. 63%. I spoke with 9 personally. 7 don't have internet access at all. 3 of those 7 don't even own computers. He leaned back. Gloria Benton has never created an online account for anything in her life. Silence filled the room. So they posted the notices. Darius said slowly. Somewhere the people affected couldn't see them. Technically, Deacon replied. The word carried the exhaustion of a man who had spent a lifetime watching the law twisted into a weapon. Technically, the city satisfied its requirement. The notice was publicly available to anyone with internet access and a registered municipal account. He let that settle. But intent matters. If they deliberately selected that method because they knew this particular neighborhood couldn't access it, then we have a constitutional argument. He began counting the grounds. Equal protection, due process. His expression hardened. The entire point of a notice requirement is to give affected residents a meaningful opportunity to respond. If the notification method was deliberately chosen to prevent that response, that's the violation. That is exactly what they did, Darius said. Deacon was already reaching for his legal pad. I'm filing the emergency injunction. This is the procedural ground I needed. For the first time since learning about the condemnation, Darius felt something loosen in his chest. Then Deacon's desk phone rang. He answered, listened. His expression changed. Thank you, he said in a voice that meant anything but. He hung up, then looked at Darius. Victor Whitmore filed an expedited order through the council. Darius stared. I invoked a public interest acceleration clause. The deadline for residents to leave has been shortened from 90 days to 60. Can he do that? It's in the city code. Deacon's voice became flat. The clause was inserted into the municipal charter as an amendment 18 months ago. Darius understood immediately. Victor Whitmore hadn't reacted to their challenge. He had anticipated it. 18 months earlier, he had already been preparing the legal tool he would eventually need. Darius thought about his mother waking before sunrise, her hospital uniform, her shoes beside the door. 60 days, not 90. I understood exactly what that meant for a woman already working double shifts. He called her. When Denise answered, noise from the laundry facility filled the background. Darius told her quickly and plainly, the way she had always taught him to deliver bad news. Say it straight. Don't decorate it. There was a long silence. 60 days? She repeated. Yes, ma'am. Another pause. He heard her inhale, slow, controlled. Okay, she said. Then again. Okay, you and Mr. Booker, keep going. Her voice strengthened. Don't stop. When Darius returned home, he saw several flattened cardboard boxes stacked against the hallway wall. The kind grocery stores gave away for free. His mother stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. Her back was toward him. She never mentioned the boxes. Neither did he. Meanwhile, Officer Tessa Morgan met Calvin Ross at a coffee shop. She was in plain clothes, jeans, a gray pullover, her hair down, without the uniform. She looked younger, softer around the edges. Her eyes, however, carried the same alert steadiness. A folder sat in front of her. Ross dropped into the chair across from her. He looked at it. How long have you been putting that together? Since the park. Ross was silent. Then he said, show me. Morgan had been careful and thorough. Body camera timestamps from the park encounter. The exact record of Claire Whitmore's emergency call. Police response records. the incident report containing Claire's name and contact information. Then came photographs Morgan had taken on her own time, condemnation notices attached to East Side buildings, red city stickers on windows, the diner's hand-painted sign, Gloria Benton's porch, a printed copy of the city's online municipal bulletin page with the registration requirement highlighted. Finally, a handwritten timeline showing Victor Whitmore's council positions and decisions made by the Municipal Development Subcommittee during the preceding 5 years. Ross read everything without speaking. When he finished, he squared the pages neatly, tapped them against the table, then put them down. "You know what this is," Morgan said. It wasn't a question. "I know. I want to take it to Renee Whitaker." Ross looked up. Renee Whitaker was an investigative reporter at the Claremont Courier. I knew the name. Most police officers in the city did. For years, she had been circling City Hall, filing public records requests, showing up at council meetings, asking questions powerful people didn't want answered, and repeatedly hitting walls. Some of those walls had been built with cooperation from people inside the police department. That fact had never sat comfortably with Ross. "If you bring this to her," he said carefully, "and it goes somewhere, people in the department are going to know it came from us. I know. Your career. Calvin." Morgan said his name quietly. It stopped him. "I have a 10-year-old son. He goes to school only a few miles from the East Side." She paused. "What am I supposed to tell him someday about what I did when I had a chance to do something?" Ross looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll go with you." That evening, both officers drove separately to East Side Community Church. Deacon Booker had organized a neighborhood meeting. They arrived in plain clothes and sat in the back. 63 residents filled the room. Folding chairs stood in uneven rows beneath fluorescent lights. At the front was a simple table with a pitcher of water and paper cups. Deacon stood before them. I explained everything. The condemnation order, the engineered code violations, the online-only public notices, the shortened deadline. I didn't soften the truth. These were adults. They deserved honesty. They had already been kept in the dark long enough. Darius stood beside him and explained the documented pattern. The unequal code enforcement, property assessments, the diner's permit denials. His voice remained steady. Officer Ross watched him from the back of the room. Something stirred inside him. Recognition. Ross had grown up only a few blocks away. I knew exactly what it cost a young black man from the East Side to stand before a room full of adults and hold himself that steady. Gloria Benton rose from the third row. She was 74 and wore a floral Sunday dress despite it being the middle of the week. "I raised 5 children in my house," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. "My husband is buried at New Hope Church, 2 blocks from my front door." Then she sat down. That was all. It was enough. After the meeting, as residents slowly filed outside, a woman approached from the side. She was in her mid-50s, with natural hair, a reporter's notebook in her hand, and reading glasses resting against her forehead. She placed a business card on the table. No ceremony. "I've been waiting for something solid," Renee Whitaker said. She looked at Deacon. "I think I'm looking at it." Soon afterward, the state appellate court granted Deacon's emergency injunction. The condemnation proceedings were frozen pending mandatory review. The court cited constitutional deficiencies in the city's notification process. Deacon's argument had landed exactly where he intended. The judges agreed that an online-only notice had failed to provide the affected residents with adequate notification. The entire process had to stop and answer for itself. Darius felt something release inside his chest, not break. Release, like a fist that had been clenched for weeks, finally beginning to open. "Is it over?" he asked. It's paused, Deacon said carefully. That's not the same as over. He looked at Darius. But it's real, and it's happening now, so we take the win. The news spread through the East Side, the way news always moved through tight communities. Quickly, personally, door to door, Darius told his mother. Denise called Gloria. Gloria was soon standing on her porch, telling anyone who passed. Harold and Mabel Green pushed the diner tables together and began cooking. Before long, dozens of people were seated in mismatched chairs with plates in front of them. Collard greens, cornbread, fried chicken, macaroni from the large pot Mabel only used on special occasions. It wasn't exactly a party. It was quieter, more careful. The kind of celebration people have when they know the ground beneath them is still uncertain. But the smiles were real. The laughter was real. Gloria sat at the head of the longest table, ate 2 full plates, and told everyone who would listen about the garden she intended to plant the following spring. After the meal, Denise went to Deacon's office. Darius watched her enter and close the door. Through the small window, he saw his mother wearing the good blouse she saved for important occasions. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw her reach across the desk. She took Deacon's hand in both of hers and held it for a long time. That evening, Darius sat on the front step as the sun disappeared over the corridor. The air had cooled. Somewhere farther down the block, someone played old familiar music through an open window. His scholarship letter rested folded inside his shirt pocket. He called his aunt Yvonne in Columbus. She answered while cooking dinner. Darius told her he had something important to share. Then, for the first time since receiving it, he read the scholarship letter aloud. Every word. When he finished, his aunt was silent. Then she made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Raw, uncontrolled, completely genuine. She said his name 3 times, as though making sure he was real. They spoke for a long time, about school, architecture, his mother, everything. For one evening, Darius allowed himself to believe that maybe things truly would be all right. Then, Deacon arrived at his office, and found a thick envelope from the city legal department beneath his door. He read every page, standing, still wearing his coat. Victor Whitmore had not challenged the injunction. Instead, he had filed an entirely new action, a separate statute, a different legal mechanism. The entire East Side corridor had been reclassified as a public health and safety emergency zone. Attached were building inspection reports Deacon had never seen before. They described severe structural failures and dangerous conditions across the 6-block area. The appellate review of the original condemnation action was suddenly irrelevant. The new proceeding had superseded it. Deacon lowered the papers onto his desk. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he called Darius. "Come to my office." When Darius arrived, Deacon had clearly been working for hours. His normally cluttered desk had been cleared except for one carefully organized stack of documents. Each section was marked with yellow notes. Deacon didn't bother with small talk. He gestured toward the chair. Darius sat. The old man walked him methodically through the new filing. This time, the city wasn't using eminent domain. It had classified the entire corridor as a public health and safety emergency under a separate municipal statute. Different law, different procedure. The appellate court ruling on the original condemnation had no jurisdiction over this action. Technically, they were facing an entirely separate matter. "He let us win," Darius said slowly. Deacon looked at him. "Say that again." "He knew we were filing the injunction. He expected it. Darius felt the shape of the strategy forming as he spoke. So he allowed the first action to fail. Let the court pause it. While everyone focused on that, he filed this. His eyes widened. I used our victory to distract us. Deacon was quiet. Then he said, "You would have made a fine attorney." He turned toward the inspection reports. The documents claimed serious structural failures, dangerous load-bearing walls, foundation problems, electrical hazards. Every report was detailed, official, stamped, signed by city inspectors. Then Deacon picked up Darius's sketchbook. He handed it to him. "Open it." Darius turned to drawings he had made over the previous year. Sketches of East Side buildings, not simply the shapes, the details, the way an architect sees a structure, rather than the way a tourist does. Structural lines, load points, foundation edges, roof weight distribution. Each drawing had been dated in the lower corner. Deacon placed one official inspection report beside an open sketch. The report described a dangerously compromised load-bearing wall on Gloria Benton's building, a condition allegedly severe enough to require immediate evacuation. Darius's drawing of the exact same wall from months earlier showed something entirely different. Clean, vertical lines, no visible bowing, no cracking, solid brick from foundation to roof. A more recent drawing showed the same thing. "They're lying," Darius said. His voice came out flat. "Certain. They falsified the inspection reports." Deacon looked at him. "Your drawings are dated documentation that directly contradicts the conditions claimed by the city." He placed a hand near the sketchbook. "An 18-year-old boy's sketchbook may be the evidence that breaks their entire case open." Darius stared at the two documents. One carried city stamps and official signatures. The other was made of pencil lines, quiet, precise, and true. Then Deacon showed him the final section, the city's redevelopment plan for the corridor, after the emergency designation cleared the properties. Darius read it twice. It wasn't affordable housing, not a school, not a community center, not a clinic. Nothing intended for the people already living there. It was a luxury mixed-use development, high-end condominiums, boutique retail, a small hotel with a rooftop terrace. Artist renderings depicted glass, pale stone, and perfectly geometric landscaping. A place never meant for the people who had spent their lives on the East Side. The primary investor was a private equity group headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. Its local legal firm was also employed by the legal advisor to the city council. Victor Whitmore had not stumbled into this scheme. I had built it, methodically, quietly. Years of manufactured neglect, engineered vulnerability, bureaucratic patience, all leading toward glossy images of rooftop terraces standing where Gloria Benton's marigolds once grew. Darius closed his sketchbook. He rested his hand on it. "My drawings prove the inspections are false." Deacon looked at the book, then at Darius. A long silence passed. "You don't fight a man like Victor Whitmore inside a courthouse he knows how to control," Deacon said quietly. "You take the fight somewhere he can't." That night, Darius came home and found his mother in the hallway. She wasn't cooking. She wasn't unpacking. She stood holding one of the flattened moving boxes. Slowly, she folded it back into shape. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Darius couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He listened to his mother, moving through the apartment. Her footsteps, her bedroom door, running water during the night. She wasn't sleeping either. Some nights, all you can do is survive until daylight returns. Darius was at Deacon's office early. The desk was covered again, but differently. Not random clutter. 4 organized stacks, each labeled, each arranged so carefully that anyone could follow the evidence without explanation. "Sit down," Deacon said. "We're calling Renee Whitaker." The reporter answered almost immediately. Deacon told her they were ready. He asked her to choose somewhere outside downtown and away from the east side, a place unlikely to attract anyone connected to Victor Whitmore. She chose a diner several miles away. Deacon and Darius arrived first. Ross and Morgan came separately in Morgan's personal car. Both officers wore plain clothes. Renee was already sitting in a corner booth with her back against the wall, recorder on the table, notebook open, reading glasses on. She looked like someone who had spent 3 years waiting for exactly this meeting, because she had. They ordered coffee. Nobody drank it. Morgan went first. She laid out her documentation. The park incident, the emergency call, Claire Whitmore's information, police records, her photographs, condemnation notices, city stickers, community evidence, her handwritten timeline, connecting Victor Whitmore's government roles with development subcommittee decisions over the preceding 5 years. Everything was dated, everything sourced. Renee listened without interruption. Her pen moved constantly. Then Deacon presented the legal trail, the original condemnation, the inaccessible online-only notice, the accelerated deadline, the successful injunction. Then, the emergency reclassification designed to bypass that injunction. Finally, he placed the allegedly falsified inspection reports on the table. I explained what they claimed, and why those claims appeared false. Then Darius placed his sketchbook in front of Renee. He opened it, one drawing after another. Gloria's building, other properties along the corridor, dates, addresses, structural notes. Every page was an exact, quiet contradiction of the official inspection claims. Renee removed her glasses. She stared at the sketchbook. An 18-year-old drew these? Yes, ma'am, Darius replied. She looked directly at him. There was no pity in her expression, something closer to recognition. The look of someone who had spent years documenting what powerful people did to people with less power, and had suddenly found some of the clearest evidence imaginable inside a young man's pencil drawings. I need one more thing, Renee said. She turned toward Deacon. Independent structural verification. A qualified engineer willing to compare these drawings against the city reports and put his name on a formal statement saying they don't match. Deacon reached inside his jacket. He removed a folded piece of paper, a name, a telephone number. Warren Ellis, he said, retired city engineer. He completed a full structural survey of the East Side corridor several years ago. His notes match everything in Darius's sketchbook. Renee took the paper. She looked around the table. Give me 2 weeks. She was already making calls before the others reached the door. The following 2 weeks felt impossibly long and strangely fast at the same time. Darius kept moving. He helped his mother, checked in with Deacon, worked around the diner. Ate Mabel Green's cooking. Tried not to watch the calendar too closely. Deacon worked with the energy of a man half his age. Warren Ellis quickly agreed to review the evidence. I was 67, retired, careful and deliberate, in the way of someone who had spent 40 years measuring things and understood how much precision mattered. He met Deacon and Darius at his kitchen table. His original field notes from the East Side survey were spread before him, handwritten, dated, original documentation. I examined Darius's sketchbook page by page, compared every drawing against his own records. He asked Darius about his methods, how close he stood while drawing, whether the sketches came from direct observation or memory. Darius answered precisely. Finally, Ellis leaned back. These drawings are accurate. He folded his hands. They are consistent with my previous structural findings for every building I surveyed along that corridor. Then, he picked up the city's emergency inspection report. He read it once more. These reports are not. He looked toward Deacon. The structural conditions described here did not exist when I performed my survey, and I see no evidence in these drawings that those conditions developed afterward. Will you put that in writing? Deacon asked. Ellis looked at him steadily. Yes. Deacon then delivered the complete evidence package to Celeste Grant, an investigator with the State Attorney General's office. She was 58. Deacon had known her for decades. She was precise, patient, and never made promises she couldn't keep. That was why he trusted her. I gave her everything. Morgan's documentation, the legal history, Darius' sketchbook, Warren Ellis' written statement. He walked her through the evidence in order, letting the facts speak before making an argument. Celeste read everything, silently. When she finished, she looked up. How long have you had this? Long enough, Deacon said. I needed it airtight before bringing it to you. Her eyes returned to Darius's sketchbook. The drawing of Gloria Benton's building lay open. Then she said, I'm opening a formal state criminal inquiry. She paused. I'll need time to prepare subpoenas. Meanwhile, Renee Whittaker continued working. Darius rarely saw her during those weeks, but he could feel the investigation moving, like weather approaching, a change in pressure, a shift in the air. Financial records revealed that several members of the city zoning board had received consulting payments from a shell company connected to the Charlotte Investment Group. The corruption did not stop with Victor Whitmore. It spread outward from him, finding every crack. On weekends, Darius helped at Green's kitchen. He swept floors after closing, stacked chairs, listened to Harold talk about the early years, how he and Mabel had opened the place with 6 tables and a borrowed griddle, how the neighborhood had supported them then, just as they were supporting the neighborhood now. Harold laughed easily, talked with his hands. He never mentioned the possibility that everything he had built might still disappear. But sometimes he would stop speaking and stare through the diner window toward the street. Darius never interrupted those moments. Some things didn't require words. Then Deacon called. It happens Monday morning. His voice was calm and certain, the voice of a man who had arranged every piece and checked it twice. Darius hung up. He remained at the kitchen table for a long time. In the hallway, the cardboard moving boxes were still stacked against the wall. Maybe not for much longer. Monday morning arrived gray and cool. Darius woke before his alarm. He showered, dressed, sat at the kitchen table with coffee he barely touched. His mother came out wearing her work uniform. She looked at him the way she sometimes did, as though taking inventory, making sure every part of her son was still there. Today, she said. Today. Denise poured coffee and sat across from him. They didn't speak much, just 2 people, sitting together in the quiet. The way they had through every difficult thing that had ever found its way to their door. When she left for work, she briefly placed one hand on Darius's shoulder. He reached up and covered it with his own. Then she left. The apartment became silent. Darius waited for the morning to move. The Claremont City Council chamber was a wide room with low ceilings, wood paneling that had once been modern, and fluorescent lighting flattering to no one. Rows of gallery seats faced a raised curved dais. Council members sat behind nameplates and water glasses, wearing the comfortable expressions of people who had gone unchallenged for a very long time. Victor Whitmore sat near the center. Broad shoulders, short hair, the relaxed posture of a man who had occupied rooms like this for so many years that authority seemed physically built into him. I wore a dark suit. His tie looked expensive. prepared remarks set inside a neat folder. When his agenda item arrived, Victor stood, adjusted his tie, then began. Thank you, Chair. What we're discussing today is the responsible use of municipal resources in service of Claremont's long-term growth. He looked around the chamber. The East Side Corridor Revitalization Project represents an investment in this city's future, a transformation of underutilized space into a thriving, economically productive district that will generate tax revenue, create jobs, and... The chamber doors opened, not dramatically, not loudly. They simply opened the way doors do, when someone with purpose and authority pushes through without hesitation. Celeste Grant walked down the center aisle. She wore a dark blazer. State Attorney General identification hung visibly from her neck. 2 investigators walked beside her. Victor continued talking. He managed another sentence about community investment before enough eyes shifted away from him that he noticed. He looked up, saw Celeste, saw the investigators, saw the document in her hand. His sentence stopped in the middle of a word. The chamber became completely silent. Celeste reached the front. She placed a subpoena directly in front of Victor Whitmore. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Whitmore, this is a formal criminal investigation subpoena issued by the Office of the State Attorney General. She paused. You are hereby notified of a criminal inquiry involving allegations including fraudulent municipal filings, misuse of public authority, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of lawful property rights. Another pause. You'll want to contact your attorney. Silence held for several seconds. Then the chamber erupted. Voices from the gallery. Council members turning toward one another. A television reporter immediately standing. Victor remained at the podium. His prepared remarks rested only inches from his hand. His expression moved through several emotions and finally settled into something smaller, controlled, exposed. The face of a man who had spent 5 years building a system and was now watching it collapse in front of witnesses. He reached for his water. His hand shook. Then something telling happened. Council colleagues seated beside him subtly shifted their chairs away, only a few inches, but everyone could see it. People distancing themselves from something they had suddenly decided they had never been close to. At the back of the gallery, an East Side resident pulled out his phone. He called Gloria Benton. She answered immediately. Turn on the news, he said. His voice trembled with something that wasn't sadness, wasn't exactly joy. It was what justice sounds like when you finally see it arriving. Turn it on right now. Everything moved quickly after that. Members of the zoning board resigned. A circuit judge with documented ties to Victor Whitmore's legal network formally recused himself from related municipal cases because of a conflict of interest. The state froze every municipal filing connected to Whitmore Property Partners. Permits, development applications, outstanding requests. Everything stopped while the criminal investigation proceeded. The luxury development was halted entirely. The glossy renderings of rooftop terraces, boutique stores, and expensive condominiums went nowhere. They remained on paper, unbuilt, exactly where they belonged. Then, the document Darius had been waiting for finally reached Deacon's office. Deacon called him. For the first time in weeks, there was something lighter in his voice. Come over. He paused. Bring your mother. Deacon chose to read the formal rescission order on Gloria Benton's front porch. She deserved to hear it there, on the porch, where her marigolds still bloomed orange and yellow beneath the summer sun. On the steps she had swept every morning for 41 years. Gloria sat in her chair with both hands around the railing. Deacon stood on the top step and opened the document. He read every word, slowly, clearly. Both condemnation actions. The original eminent domain proceeding, and the later public health emergency reclassification, had been formally and permanently rescinded by the state. All proceedings terminated. No further action authorized. When Deacon finished, Gloria remained completely still. Then she covered her face with both hands. She breathed deeply into them. The sound of 41 years of home being allowed to remain home. Darius stood at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the marigolds. Harold Green heard the news shortly afterward. He called Mabel from the kitchen. Standing in the middle of the diner, he told her. Mabel Green, who had never cried in front of a customer during 30 years of business, dropped into the nearest chair and cried. Harold placed a hand on her shoulder. After a moment, Mabel stood, wiped her face with her apron, returned to the kitchen. The diner reopened. Coffee was free. They served food until nearly everything in the kitchen was gone. Then Renee Whitaker's reporting exposed the full structure of the scheme. Years of engineered neglect, manufactured code violations, falsified inspection reports, financial connections to the Charlotte Private Equity Group, names, documents, records. The story spread beyond Claremont. A second investigation focused specifically on Claire Whitmore. It documented her signatures on multiple Whitmore Property Partners filings, documents she later claimed to know nothing about. It included her emergency call from the park and the broader pattern surrounding her behavior. The reporting was factual, carefully sourced, and devastating in the particular way facts can be devastating when arranged honestly. Claire was quietly removed from the board of the Claremont Heritage Foundation. She later resigned from the Neighborhood Beautification Committee she had chaired for years. Women she had socialized with for a decade stopped returning her calls. The park, where she had called the police on Darius, was later renamed through a community petition, Millbrook Community Commons. The city approved the change without objection. One evening, Denise Coleman came home from work. She removed her shoes beside the door. Then she walked toward the hallway. 4 flattened cardboard boxes still waited in the corner. She looked at them, picked them up one by one, carried them outside, and placed them in the recycling bin. Then she returned inside, washed her hands, put the kettle on, made herself coffee. She stood at the kitchen window while it cooled, looking toward the street. Still there. Everything. Still exactly where it belonged. The final Sunday of August arrived quietly. Darius woke early. Not from fear this time. From something lighter. He stayed in bed for several minutes, listening to familiar neighborhood sounds through the window. A car starting. A screen door closing. The distant sound of Harold opening the diner. The ordinary soundtrack of his entire life. He got up, put on the oversized blue hoodie, picked up his sketchbook. Green's kitchen was warm. It smelled of butter, coffee, and decades of Sunday mornings. Harold worked behind the counter the way he always did. No wasted movement. Cracking eggs with one hand, calling something toward Mabel without looking up. Managing several things at once. The kind of skill that, after enough years, stops looking like skill and simply becomes part of who someone is. Darius sat at the counter, ate scrambled eggs and toast, drank 2 cups of coffee, allowed the morning to be exactly what it was. Easy, ordinary, still there. Mabel emerged from the kitchen and placed a piece of cornbread in front of him without being asked. She briefly patted his hand, then returned to work. Darius ate it. When he stood to leave, Harold looked at him. Come back at Christmas. His tired eyes were warm. I'll make the good stuff. Yes, sir. Darius walked the entire corridor afterward, all 6 blocks, slowly, past Frank Wallace's rusted pickup, past the damaged sidewalk near the laundromat, past buildings he had drawn from nearly every angle. Their facades were as familiar to him as faces. Every crack, every ledge, every window frame. Gloria sat on her porch, as she often did on Sunday mornings, a cup of tea beside her, a devotional open in her lap, marigolds overflowing from every pot around her, orange, yellow, alive, present, going absolutely nowhere. She looked up when Darius stopped at the foot of her steps. "Leaving tomorrow," he said. She studied him. "You ready?" Darius considered the question seriously. "I think so." She nodded. "Good." Then she looked at him over her glasses. "You go do what you came here to do." She paused. "And then you come back and do what you were made to do." Her expression made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." Gloria returned to her devotional. Darius continued walking. Later, he sat on a bench near the far end of the corridor, his sketchbook opened across his knees, and he drew. Not one building this time. All of them, the entire 6-block neighborhood in one wide view, as though he were standing high enough above it to see everything at once. First, he drew what existed. Every roofline, every porch, every hand-painted sign, every clay flower pot, every crack in the sidewalk, exactly as it stood. Then, carefully, he began drawing what it could become. Not luxury condominiums, not boutique hotels, not rooftop terraces for people who had never walked these streets. He drew the neighborhood itself, preserved and expanded. A community center where a vacant lot had sat unused for years. A proper park with benches and trees connecting the north end of the corridor to the walking path. The row houses renovated. Same bones, same faces, but repaired, maintained, treated as though the people living inside them mattered. New storefronts for local businesses. More outdoor space for Green's kitchen. He drew all of it with the same careful pencil lines he used for everything. Precise, deliberate, loving. Because paying close attention to something is often its own form of love. At the bottom of the page, Darius wrote, Phase 1. The next morning, Denise Coleman stood on the front steps in her good cardigan. Not her work uniform. Her good cardigan. She watched her son walk out carrying his luggage. 2 bags. A duffel, his backpack. The sketchbook inside. On were the blue hoodie, still too large. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked at his mother. Denise had promised herself she would be practical about this. Matter of fact. She had always been a practical woman. "You have the scholarship letter." "Yes, ma'am." "Your health insurance card?" "In my wallet." "Call me when you get there." "I will." Denise nodded once, decisively, as though that settled everything. Darius picked up his bags. He walked toward the end of the block and turned in the direction of the bus stop. At the corner, he stopped, looked back, raised one hand. His mother raised hers. Then he turned the corner and disappeared from view. Denise Coleman remained on the front step for another moment. The corridor was quiet and bright around her. Gloria's marigolds were visible from where she stood. The diner sign rested farther down the block. The street that had almost been taken was still there. The neighborhood that had refused to disappear. Then Denise exhaled. One long, slow breath. Every fear she had carried since the day her son was born. Since the first time she sat him down and taught him to keep his hands where people could see them. Since every morning she had watched him walk outside into a world that had not yet decided whether it would allow him to become great. For a moment, she let all of it go. She straightened. Then she walked back inside. She had a neighborhood to help rebuild. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. On the screen, I've selected 2 special stories